And we're approaching the halfway mark of the Climate Change Conference, or COP29, in Azerbaijan. A group of former leaders and climate experts has published an open letter highlighting what has so far been a fractious summit that has made little progress. The letter accused the summit of no longer being fit for purpose, as it cannot deliver the change needed to ensure safe climate landing for humanity. It's calling for a fundamental overhaul and emphasized the need to shift from negotiations to implementation so that the summit can deliver on agreed commitments, as well as ensure the phasing out of fossil fuels. Former U.S. Vice President Al Gore also made an impassioned speech at the summit, accusing the fossil fuel industry and petrostates of seizing control of COP to an unhealthy degree. He pointed to last year's global agreement on transitioning away from fossil fuels, saying it got little mention at this year's dialogue.
We just have to decide how long the world is going to cower in front of the financial and political power of the fossil fuel industry. If we can find it within ourselves in every country to come together and make intelligent choices, we can solve this.
Kick big polluters out, weed out the six. Kick big polluters out.
Meanwhile, environmental groups have denounced the presence of fossil fuel lobbyists as oil executives gather at today's summit. It's estimated that more than 1,700 fossil fuel lobbyists have been granted access to the summit. Climate officials and activists have been growing increasingly frustrated at the failure to clamp down on fossil fuels, as well as countries and companies that promote these fossil fuels. This year's host, Azerbaijan, is heavily reliant on oil and gas revenue, and so is the next host, that's Brazil. And from we're joined by CNA's climate change correspondent Jack Board, live in Baku, Azerbaijan. Jack, just in case we need any more new figures to tell us what's going wrong as far as our fight against climate change is going, the UN releasing a new report on alarming figures related to methane. Any details on that, and how at this summit any plans or suggestions raised to fight this rise in methane?
Yeah, that's right, Wei Su. There's been a strong focus today here at COP29 on the ongoing problems associated with methane. Now, methane, of course, is far more damaging to the atmosphere compared to carbon dioxide. It traps more than 80 times the amount of heat compared to CO2, and it's actually responsible for about a third of all planetary heating. About 60% of it comes from human activities, so think agriculture, think landfills, and of course, the oil and gas sector. So today what we learned at COP29 from this new report is related to a global methane monitoring system. It's called MARS. And we found out that it has alerted various companies, various governments all around the world to 1,200 major methane plumes. But action has actually only been taken in 1% of all of these cases. So about 160 countries from around the world have signed up to a methane cutting pledge. And as well at COP28 in Dubai, we found out a major number of fossil fuel companies said they would slash methane emissions to basically zero by the end of 2030. So emissions are still on the rise, though, so something for COP to try and contend with. And at the same time, as you mentioned, louder calls to actually overhaul this entire COP system. We have diplomats like the former UN chief Ban Ki-moon saying countries should actually be excluded from this process if they're not taking climate change seriously. And he and others want more scrutiny on the hosts of these summits. And of course, that comes after the last three summits have been hosted by petrostates, UAE, Egypt, and now in Azerbaijan.
Jack, at the summit, you've been helping us keep an eye on what ministers or officials from the region in Southeast Asia have to say about their own country's fight against climate change. Earlier this week, you spoke to the Philippine Environment Minister. Earlier today, you spoke to Indonesia's Environment Minister. What did he have to say about Indonesia's stance on climate resilience?
Yeah, Indonesia, as always, very busy at these types of summits. And what the country at the moment is looking for is, somewhat of an energy revolution. Of course, it is heavily reliant on fossil fuels. So they're looking for huge amounts of climate finance. And of course, as one of the major emerging economies of the world, they are one of the driving forces to try and generate more climate financing for developing countries. So I sat down with Indonesia's new environment minister to get his thoughts on how this process has been going so far. And he, like many others, is sick of all of the talking and really just wants some action. Take a listen.
Kalau kita semua kemudian terperosok, terjebak dalam diskusi-diskusi yang tidak berkesudahan ini, di sisi lain pembangunan terus berlangsung, emisi gas rumah kaca terus tercatat, dan kita tidak melakukan apapun kecuali justification yang tidak ada habis-habisnya, maka Indonesia mengambil langkah-langkah strategis.
So while you have the large Indonesian delegation busy here in Baku, we've also seen Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto talking up the country's natural resources at the APEC summit in Lima today. What he said is that he thinks the country can be 100% reliant on renewable energy in just a few years. Obviously, that would take a lot of climate financing and money and, a major overhaul of what exists currently in that country. Wei Su.
And of course, we're looking at climate finance all this week at Baku with CNA's Jack Bott, reporting there live from Baku in Azerbaijan.